At the 6th post, one of the soldiers radioed into the control room informing them that they were in need of help. He says Corporal Kim Jeong is down. The control team informed them that the rapid response unit had departed, and they asked the 6th post to defend their location with their lives. However, with the way things are going, it seems the 6th post will be wiped out. The goblins were all over the 6th post building. Luckily, Corporal Kim had acted quickly, and he casted a barrier over the building. The soldier with Corporal Kim asked Kim if he was okay. Kim was barely holding on to life. He told the soldier that the barrier he casted wouldn't last long. The soldier radioed into the control room again, asking if they planned on coming after the goblins finished them off. Suddenly, all of the banging noise the goblins were making stopped. This confused the soldier, and he looked around questioning why the goblins stopped attacking. Outside, the goblin shaman was casting the earth shot skill. After it finished chanting, hundreds of boulders were shot at the 6th post. Inside, Kim and the soldier hung on for dear life. The soldier asked Kim if he knew what's happening now, and Kim says the boss monster was attacking. He told the soldier that after the post is destroyed, it's likely the goblins will capture them and bring them to an altar where they will harvest their hearts while they are still alive. Kim lifted the barrel of his gun and brought it close to his mouth. The soldier questioned what the corporal was doing, and Kim told the soldier that ending it now would be less painful than having the goblins rip his heart out. The soldier was brought to tears. It seemed like there was no way to avoid death. The goblin shaman started casting another earth shot skill. As it chanted its spell, the soldier received good news. Lee radioed into the 6th post saying he would be assisting them from now on. He asked the soldier, Private Park, to load his crossbow, and when he did, he should use his fire skill and aim at the light. This confused Private Park, so Lee repeated that he wanted Park to get his crossbow and take aim at the light. Park followed Lee's orders. He loaded his crossbow and began casting his fire skill. However, he was still doubtful because he believed they would need a unit of archers at his level to be able to put up a fight. As he looked out, he could see the boulders of the goblin shaman's skill forming. He remained focused, but he couldn't see the light Lee wanted him to aim at. He radioed to Lee asking what he should be aiming for. Suddenly, he saw a light glowing in between the boulders. Lee had his flashlight on, and he had a goblin by the chin with its neck exposed for a shot. His other hand was pointing in the direction of the 6th post. He told Park that all he has to do is take aim. He will be the one controlling the trigger. He did the motioning of pulling a trigger. And at the post, Park was shocked because the trigger on his crossbow suddenly moved by itself. The shot was fired, and at the last second Lee released the goblin and he jumped away. The goblin suddenly burst into flames, and Lee received a notification informing him that he had consumed 1% of his mana. Lee looked at notification and smiled. With this strategy, he could save his mana, and as a bonus, he had access to Park's destructive archer abilities. All of the goblins' attention were turned to their burning comrade, and they began to panic. Inside the post, Kim stared at Park, trying to grasp the situation. Park was still in shock because the shot actually hit. The goblin shaman noticed Lee, and after it finished casting its skill, it directed the attack at Lee. Lee quickly moved out of the way and he took cover in some bushes. He turned his flashlight off and disappeared into the darkness of the forest. The goblin shaman's attack had destroyed part of the forest. Park was dumbfounded. Lee snapped him out of it and told him to reload his crossbow and take aim again. All the goblin shaman could do was watch as Lee sneakily made his way around, slowly wiping his army out. In some other part of the forest, Junmo was going around questioning why Lee put a private like him in charge of finding a boss monster. And even if he could find the boss monster, it's likely he would die after sending the signal. He made his way to the 6th post and he took cover in some bushes. He stopped searching for the boss monster because Lee was in the process of wiping out the other goblins. This left him confused because Lee made it sound like he would be buying time for the response team to get here. However, from the scene it seemed like Lee was trying to clear the entire dungeon by himself. One of the goblins who was fleeing from Lee noticed Junmo hiding in the bushes. The goblin lifted its blade in the air and prepared to end Junmo. Junmo couldn't react in time. All he could do was hope Lee would save him. Luckily, Lee quickly caught up to the fleeing goblin. He used his combat knife to deflect the goblin's blade. Then he turned on his flashlight, and after Park took aim, Lee shot the crossbow, ending the goblin. He turned off his flashlight quickly and ran by Junmo, reminding him of the job he gave him to do. Junmo quickly grabbed his gun and he started his search for the boss monster again. But in the distance he could see as Lee was setting the goblins on fire, and he wondered if Lee really is the same person he knew. Lee continued to kill the goblins with his strategy. He was starting to wonder when the goblin shaman would reveal itself again. A notification appeared warning him that he is losing mana at a rapid rate, and his mana reserves were below 12%. Lee wondered if the goblin shaman is waiting for him to run out of mana. Suddenly he heard Junmo calling out to be saved again. Lee turned quickly and he began running in the direction of Junmo's voice. When arrived, he saw the goblin shaman holding Junmo hostage. Junmo apologized, saying he did his best to follow Lee's orders, but in the end he was caught. Lee took out his combat knife and prepared to attack. The goblin shaman pointed its staff at Junmo's neck. It spoke in monster tongue, and even though Lee couldn't speak monster, he knew what the goblin shaman was saying. He gritted his teeth, then he dropped his weapon. Suddenly goblins who were hiding in the shadows appeared. Lee told Junmo that because of him it's checkmate. The goblins jumped at Lee to deliver the finishing strike. Lee smiled. He took control of Junmo's gun trigger and he blasted the goblin shaman, greatly injuring it. The goblin shaman dropped Junmo and began to run away. Lee chased after it, saying it's time to bon appetit. With his combat knife he struck the back of the goblin shaman, but his combat knife bounced off because the goblin shaman had leather armor covering its back. Another notification appeared informing Lee that he was quickly running out of mana, and his mana reserves were below 9%. Lee continued to chase after the goblin shaman, questioning why the boss monster only covered its back with the leather armor. The goblin shaman ran back to the gate. Lee was close behind, and after seeing the gate Lee realized that if the goblin shaman entered he would lose his opportunity. The goblin shaman began to slowly make its way close to the gate, laughing at Lee. Lee reached forth his hand, pushing his body to the limit to reach the goblin shaman. The goblin shaman jumped at the gate, and as it entered Lee realized that its necklace was made of metal, with only 7% of his mana remaining. He manipulated the goblin shaman's necklace and pulled it back from the gate. Lee's mana dropped to 4%. The goblin shaman tried resisting, so Lee pulled him back with the chain again, and with 1% of his mana left he manipulated his combat knife and struck the goblin shaman's skull. The battle ended, but Lee's mana reserves were at 0. And he was exhausted. While barely standing he complained about his body from the past and said he needs to put it through a workout. As he was standing there, a skill called Holy Light was used in the air. Lee knew she was here. He quickly went to the goblin shaman's body and he began looking for the adamantium. He found it, but the reserve soldiers also found the gate. They pointed their guns at Lee and told him not to move or they would open fire. Lee put the adamantium in his mouth and lifted his hands in the air. The soldiers asked Lee to identify himself. Lee quickly ate the adamantium, and he turned around and identified himself to the soldiers. Because of mana exhaustion, Lee dropped to his knees. The soldiers quickly rushed over and they asked the support group to bring a stretcher for Lee. Seeing how the gate was still open means there are goblins still scattered around, so Sioyuna ordered the other soldiers to spread out and look for the stragglers. Sioyuna was confused by what she was seeing, and she questioned if 4 regular soldiers really took down a boss monster. All of the dead goblins and even the goblin shaman had similar wounds, and after further observation Sioyuna concluded that this was the doing of one person. As the support team was taking Lee away with the stretcher, Sioyuna could hear him giggling. Lee received a notification congratulating him for consuming the legendary item adamantium. But since a metal was already being absorbed, the adamantium absorption will be delayed. Lee did his best to cover his face so the other soldiers wouldn't see him smiling. Another notification appeared on top of the previous one, informing him that the metal he ate is enchanted, and after absorption he will develop magic skills similar to the enchantment. The expected weight increase the adamantium will give is undeterminable by the system, but the system predicted that the weight and mana boost would be leagues better than previously given for other metals. Sioyuna watched Lee. She couldn't understand why he was laughing in this kind of situation. Lee received another notification. This one congratulated him because immediately after he consumed the adamantium, a rare ability was revealed. He could now detect all metals within his range of control. Lee was excited. He finally got the skill back. The control team radioed for Sioyuna saying they found the runaway goblins and they were close to post 6. Sioyuna and the other soldiers quickly rushed to post 6, and as they went Lee activated the ability and he could sense all of the metal weapons Sioyuna and the soldiers were carrying. He lifted his arm in the air and smiled. Today was the day the Great Steel Emperor made his comeback. A few days later, after the gate incident, we see 2 ladies making their way through the 3rd Brigade 1st Battalion station gossiping about the rumors that had spread about the gate. The lady informed her friend that apparently the F-rank rumor is true. Her friend dismissed this idea, saying it's not possible. The lady told her that it was, and said she heard it from the worker Ajashi himself. She continued to explain that the other soldiers were just waiting to be killed. But suddenly an F-rank corporal appeared and with his combat knife he sliced up the goblins. The lady's friend questioned if it's possible for an F-rank to do something like this, and she asked her to stop living in a fantasy. In some place close by, Sergeant Sanguk, a wizard and 2nd Squad commander, was questioning Private Park about the rumors. Park told him everything that happened that night, but Sanguk asked Park if he wanted him to believe that bullshit. Park saluted him, saying he is telling the truth. A giant of a man approached Park asking him to lower his voice. Park began to lower his hands, saying he will rectify his rudeness right away. The giant of a man placed his hands on Park's shoulders and said Sang-uk hasn't accepted his salute yet, and he proceeded to ask Park why he was lowering his hands. He grabbed Park by the ears, and Park quickly lifted his hands and began saluting again. He was sweating nervously, and he told the giant of a man that he didn't mean anything by it. Sang-uk called the giant of a man Wonsuk. The private Wonsuk was brought to attention, and Sang-uk asked him if he could take 3 of the boys and raid a gate, since he had the power to rip goblins apart with his bare hands. Private Wonsuk is a barbarian that specializes in close combat. He is a D rank with the capability of outputting powers close to C rank. Wonsuk told Sang-uk that what he just asked would be impossible. Park agreed, and said he didn't see the soldiers defeat the goblin shaman, so he guessed Lee just delivered the final blow. Sang-uk thought this was plausible, but if by some fluke an F rank went wild and cleared a dungeon, then it will become an issue for the military's discipline. And he can't let it become an issue for military discipline. Wonsuk agreed, and he smiled menacingly. Inside the battalion commander's office, Lee reported in saying he came because he was told he had business in the commander's office. He was a little irritated because if the gate issue was cleared without any casualty, then they should have just let him go. He wondered why he was called into the battalion commander's office. In the office with the battalion commander was Lieutenant Seo Yunha, a B rank black paladin, and Lieutenant Lee Minhee, a C rank wizard. The battalion commander, Lieutenant Major Kim Kang-seok, a B-rank druid with the nickname Namsen's King of the Mountain, asked Lee if it's true that he disobeyed the command to wait and forcefully repelled the first round of the gate. Lee lowered his head. He knew if he said one wrong thing he would end up in military trial. He told himself to get a grip, and he started coming up with a plan that will land him in the guardhouse at most. Lee told Kang-seok that what he said was true, and he said he responded immediately while on duty and seized that gate's outbreak. Kang-seok told Lee that he read the reports but says he couldn't understand what he was reading. In a normal situation, Lee, an F-rank soldier, should have been ripped to shreds by the goblins. Lee could feel the incredible pressure in the room, and he knows if he steps back here his military life will be screwed. He told Kang-seok that he feels wronged. He elaborated further, saying he feels as if the battalion commander has scammed him. Confused, Kang-seok asked him what he meant. But before Lee could respond, Lieutenant Minhee stepped in, saying, "How dare an F-rank soldier say that to the battalion commander?" Kang-seok stopped Minhee from saying more, and he asked Lee to elaborate further. Lee told Kang-seok that there is something he emphasized every time he trained them, something he says without fail every single time. He asked Kang-seok if he remembers. Kang-seok remained silent, and Lee repeated his own words to him. "No matter how low your rank is, if you approach using the Ant's Great Monster Tactical Textbook, then even if you are D rank, no even E rank, you will be able to face a troll." Lee says according to Kang-seok's teaching, even an F rank like him should be able to take on a goblin. And although it's true he did go against the command of the control team, if he hadn't gone to support the 6th post, all of the soldiers at the 6th post would have died. Lee was impressed with himself for that response because he has attacked Kang-seok rationally. It was time to attack him emotionally. He repeated another one of Kang-seok's saying to him, "For a true soldier there are no ranks. Prepare for the worst and fight with all you have." Lee reminded Kang-seok that he also emphasized this during their training, and so, like he said, as a true soldier would, under the battalion commander he respects. He took the tactics he learned after difficult training to heart and did his best to respond by carrying out the strategy with the other soldiers and his life on the line. Lee continued, saying the only reason he could endure his military life while being mocked and looked down upon for being an F rank was because of the true military mindset he felt from the battalion commander. So to see Kang-seok deny the results of that belief makes him feel like his entire military life has been denied, and that is why he feels scammed by Kang-seok. Battalion Commander Kim Kang-seok, right around when he was appointed as the 2nd lieutenant, a gate opened. Orcs poured out of this gate, and Kang-seok almost lost his life while fighting the orcs. But without a second thought or hesitation, he returned to the army after receiving medical help, and he became an early foundational member of the AMT. In other words, Kang-seok is a soldier down to the bone. Lee lowered his head because he couldn't stop himself from smiling. He just told Kang-seok that he believed in his words as his superior, and put his life on the line for his fellow soldiers, so he believed there is no way Kang-seok would send him to military trial. Kang-seok approached Lee and he grabbed him by the shoulders, saying he now understands. Kang-seok then asked Lee to become a non-commissioned officer. At the same moment, Lee's metal absorption was completed and he gained the new skill Steel Physique. It was a D-rank skill that uses mana to temporarily strengthen a part of Lee's body. As the notification fired fireworks, Lee stared at Kang-seok, completely lost for words. Minhee too was at a loss for words, and Seo Yuna couldn't help but giggle. Kangseok was so moved by what Lee said that he was brought to tears. He was certain he was making the correct decision. Lee started to sweat nervously by how Kangseok was looking at him. It didn't seem like a joke, so he asked if he heard correctly inside the 3rd Brigade 1st Battalion Station training room. While the other soldiers were sparring to better their skills, Lee was angrily doing some bench press. He racked the weight and sat up. While trying to avoid the guardhouse, he managed to get himself into bigger trouble. While Lee was cooling down, Sanguk and Wonsuk looked over at him. Sanguk tapped Wonsuk on the chest, signaling for him to start. Lee picked up his green towel and began wiping his face to go for a second round. He recalled Minhee telling Kangseok that he can't make Lee a non-commissioned officer, since an F rank has never become a non-commissioned officer in AMP before. Lee was grateful to Minhee, because he was able to gain some time by saying he will think about it thanks to him. He concluded that it's for the best that he live like a mouse for a while so he doesn't catch Kangseok's eyes again. Suddenly, Wonsuk appeared behind Lee's bench asking if he was done using it. Lee told Wonsuk that he wasn't, but Wonsuk continued to lean on the weights. Lee turned around and asked Wonsuk what he was doing. Wonsuk picked up the weight Lee was using and he began to curl it. He said he thought if it was the person who is hot and famous these days, they would be using heavier weight. This scene caught the attention of Junmo and the other soldiers who were training. Lee looked over and he noticed Sanguk and his few friends laughing. Sanguk was mocking him by curling around some 2-pound dumbbells. Lee quickly realized that Sanguk was the one who put Wonsuk up to this, and he knows that if he avoids him right now, he'll openly start to bully him like in his previous life. Lee was starting to get annoyed. An unavoidable situation where he has to show his power has appeared, when he just decided not to catch anyone's eye for the time being. He told Wonsuk that he had felt annoyed just now, so he came at the perfect time. Lee angrily turned his head and he asked Wonsuk to spar with him. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, then hit the like button.